So this is John chapter 9, the scripture for the 11th of December. John 9 tells this cohesive story. It's a beautifully cohesive story about a man who was born blind. Jesus' disciples, along with most of the rest of the Hebrews at this time, held to a view that suggested suffering was a result of personal or parental sin. The idea that God will not forgive the guilty, but will pass on to the third and fourth generation, will punish the children for the sins of their parents. This is the same concept that we see in Job chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. And it's not a concept that Jesus holds. Not only does Jesus dismiss this view out of hand, but Jesus also does the difficult work of healing. Not just curing the man's ailment, but healing his relationships, social relationships, along with physical bodily healing. Now, if Jesus were merely interested in showing that he could give sight to the blind, verse 7 could be the end of the story. I've linked an article below in the description by a friend of mine, also named Joel, who was a PhD student at Princeton when I was there. It's a really interesting take on Jesus' healing story. I'd invite you to read it if you have the time. So the man that Jesus healed has relationships. Not just with neighbors who see him there, but also with religious leaders and with parents and then with Jesus himself. And all of these relationships are affected when he encounters Jesus. All of these relationships for you are affected when you encounter Jesus, with neighbors and friends, with religious leaders, with parents, and with Jesus himself. With neighbors, there are changed expectations. Perhaps your neighbors will want to know why you're acting differently, or maybe what's changed in your life. They might even want to encounter Jesus also, much like the blind man's neighbors, the formerly blind man's neighbors did here. With religious leaders, there are charged conversations. Perhaps they feel threatened because your encounter with Jesus or your religious experience doesn't fit with their theology. Perhaps instead of receiving you as a fellow pilgrim trying to make their way down the road, they treat you like a doctrinal football. They might even question your past or your history, much like the religious leaders do here, not trusting the formerly blind man to have been blind since birth. With family or with parents, there are challenging choices. Perhaps they will support you. Perhaps they will verify your past, lend their voice to yours here, but then refuse to join you where Jesus is leading you. They might even abandon you to hostile questions, as the formerly blind man's parents do here. But with Jesus, there's credible acceptance. Perhaps your life looks differently now, but Jesus is willing to believe and accept you, both for who you were and for who you're becoming. He may even intercede on your behalf against those who claim to speak for him. So, to sum up, with neighbors, there are changed expectations. With religious leaders, there can be charged conversations. With family, there are challenging choices. With Jesus, there's credible acceptance. But every relationship is changed when we encounter Jesus, regardless of whether we have a physical ailment from which Jesus heals us. Jesus will change our relationships for good. Now, during the second interaction between the religious leaders and the formerly blind man, we can see how much discipline the formerly blind man has. He feels secure in what he knows, and he's going to give his testimony that Jesus made him, a man born blind, able to see again. I think that every Christian, regardless of how new you are to the faith, has a similar testimony. You can speak to what Jesus has done for you. Regardless of what the religious leaders suggest to him, this is the core truth he comes back to over and over and over again. This is why Jesus at the end of the chapter calls the religious leaders blind. They didn't even change their opinion after Jesus healed a blind man, suggesting that they are the ones truly unable to see. So I wonder, what experience with Jesus helps you to anchor your faith? That's all for John chapter 9. On Monday, the 14th, we'll look at John chapter 10. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.